There's two things holding most photographers back from getting into ultra macro or super macro photography. And the first one is the price point on the lens, and the second one is the skill required to take the photos. And this new release lens essentially eliminates that price barrier for most amateur or beginning photographers. This is a 25mm 2 to 5 times macro lens by a company called Aberration, and it was provided to me by the Gear company, which is one of the few companies out there that is actually stocking and selling the lens right now. So I will put some links in the description down below to their Amazon shop. And as I said, they're one of the few that you can actually buy this from right now. Now, just looking at the lens itself, it is quite a unique lens in the way that it operates. It has a ring here, which you would generally consider a focus ring on most lenses, but this is actually how you change the magnification of the lens, or how magnified the images that you're taking. So when it's all the way down in its sort of folded down form, that is 2 times magnification. As we move it up, that's 3.5, and as it goes all the way out, that is 5 times magnification. So what would you use a 2 to 5 times macro lens for? Well, the first thing is images of very small insects. And I think I see this as probably the prime use and the most common use of a lens like this. And the images that I'm throwing on screen now, these aren't actually images I've taken. They've been taken by some of the photographers that work with Aberration. In my area right now, it's been very wet and cold, and there haven't been any insects to get photos of. So I'm just throwing some examples they've provided that were taken with the lens. But coming up, I do have some photos I've taken and some real world examples, and I'll sort of describe how I got there. The other thing that I think this lens would be excellent for is for close-up images of products. Now, this could be jewelry, it could be sort of details on a watch face. In a controlled lighting environment, you could get some very dramatic, interesting, and detailed shots of very, very small products or part of a detailed product. Now, just have a look at some of the images that I've captured with the lens. And just to tell you a little story about this first image, and I'll just grab it out of this little thing. This, I was walking on a beach in New South Wales, Australia, and I stepped down on something and it was very sharp and it really hurt my foot, and I sort of pulled my foot out of the sand, and this is what it turned out to be. This is a very, very tiny, looks to be like a baby pufferfish or something like that. You can see it's probably a little bit bigger than the end of my pinky finger. I reached down in the sand, pulled this thing out, and thought, wow, that's interesting. That might be interesting to look at under a macro lens like this. So the first photo I'm going to show you, this is 2 times magnification. Now, at 2 times magnification, that means that this is going to be projected on the sensor at double the size of what it is in real life. And what you'll see is I can't even fit this whole little fish thing in to a full frame sensor. That's how close 2 times magnification is. Now this next one is 3.5 times magnification, and you see we're getting even closer. We're probably only getting maybe 1/3 of the body of this tiny little fish in. And then in the final one, this is a 5 times magnification. And those little dots that you're seeing on the screen, those are actually grains of sand. So those are grains of sand, and as you can see, they look absolutely huge. The other one that I just took a single shot with, this is just a 2 times magnification, and that was of this tiny little shell. And you can see how small that little shell is. Hopefully that's coming through. You can see how small that little shell is, and as you can see, it almost fills the entire full frame sensor. Now, that's the other thing I should mention. This is a full frame lens, but can also be used on crop sensor cameras. And because it has such strong resolving power, I think it works equally well on both types of cameras. Now, this lens in use is completely different than any normal lens that you've ever used. And this is where the challenge comes. Very challenging to use a lens like this, but also very rewarding. But I want to sort of let you know what you're in for. To start with, when you are turning what you would normally think of as the focus ring, you are changing the magnification. So this is not changing the focus, this is changing the magnification. The next thing is, with this lens, the aperture control is situated at the front here, And most of the time, I shot most of my shots at f11. It's a clicked aperture ring. And because you're getting so close to the object, the closer you get to the object, the more shallow your depth of field is, or the more shallow the area that's in focus. So by stopping that down to f11 or f16, you're getting the maximum depth of focus, or the most amount in focus, which is kind of what we're trying to achieve generally with these shots, because we want as much detail as possible. So most of these shots were at f11 or f16. The other thing you should know is the way that you focus a macro lens like this is you take the object and you put it in your shot, and then you get the lens closer and further away. The distance the lens is focusing from the end of the lens element to the object remains the same all the time. You do not change the distance that you're focusing. The way you focus is by moving the lens closer and further away from the object. This is true of all of the lenses that have this sort of magnification. And even if you are using a 1x macro lens, if you want to get a full 1x macro magnification, you have to put that at minimum focus distance and do it the same way. So that's the way you even get a 1x magnification on a 1x macro lens. But importantly, unlike other or most other common macro lenses out there, this lens will not focus to infinity. So it can only be used as a macro lens from 2 to 5 times. You can only take photos or videos of objects that are very, very close to the lens, almost touching the end of the lens mount. Just having a look at the lens itself, it is an incredibly well-built lens, and it is built sort of similar to other Astrohori products. It is so well built that it almost feels like it's a cross between a lens and a piece of farming equipment. Everything is metal on the lens. It's got a polished metal lens mount. All the rings, there's not a bit of rubber or plastic on the entire thing that I can find. It's all metal. It has this really interesting textured, knurled, I'm not sure what you call this, around the aperture ring and the magnification setting ring, which is a character of all of the Astrohori lenses I've tested. And it's really interesting and quite cool, and it has somewhere between a sort of an ultra modern and ultra retro feel to the whole thing. But it's a beautifully built lens, particularly for the price point. It's available on all the popular mirrorless mounts, and it is a full frame lens, but I think it works equally well on APS-C sensor cameras. Keeping in mind, on an APS-C sensor camera, you're actually getting a smaller field of view, so you are going to have a little bit less versatility because you're zoomed in even more, but I think the image quality is still going to be excellent. Now, looking at the vignette performance on this lens, which is kind of an unusual one to talk about, this lens is showing me some level of what's called mechanical vignette. And if you look at the back of the lens, I'm not sure if this is something that's just affecting the copy I've got because it's a pre-release copy, or whether the real copy will have this. But you see that little square on the back of the lens. That is actually producing what's called a mechanical vignette. And when you look at my photos, there is this sort of weird, almost vintage sort of film style cutout around the edge. That is being shaded by that bit of the lens, and it's what's called a mechanical vignette, because mechanical vignette means it's actually something physical in the lens blocking the edges. So in this case, I've got these sort of blocked edges, although I do find that when I go into 5x magnification, it does seem to eliminate that. This might be eliminated on the final version, and I expect it probably will, but I just want to mention it. As far as normal vignette, there's really not much to speak of, and if you're shooting it at f11 or f16, which is what I'm going to be doing all the time, it's nothing I would worry about. Chromatic aberration, I'm not really seeing any chromatic aberration present, so that is not an issue as far as image quality. Flare performance is excellent, except in a few situations where I was taking the photo of the little fish and it was on a white table and I was blasting a whole lot of light down onto that table. It did seem to be reflecting off the table and removing some of the contrast in the image. It's not a problem. You can just go in and edit it and it's sort of fine. You just add that contrast back in. But if you do have some really bright light shining into it, you might get some decrease in contrast. But in my real world shots, I didn't see much of that. There was plenty of contrast and the image was very good. Looking at sharpness and detail, there's another lens, another 2 to 5 times lens. I think it's by Laowa. And a very well-known macro photographer, Michael, actually was having a look at this and comparing it to that lens. And he felt that the Astra Hori, at about a third or a half the price or something like that, actually was a sharper lens. And in all the image samples that I've taken, it is an incredibly sharp lens. And just a quick look at bokeh. When you do get the background blur, which there is a lot of it if you're sort of close to a subject and it's sort of falling away, the background blur is sort of pleasing and nice. And yeah, I don't think there's any problems there. Just want to cover quickly the disadvantages of shooting with any 2 to 5 times macro magnification lens, because I still think this lens isn't for everybody, but for the people that it is for, I think it'll be a great lens and you'll really love it. To start with, it's a macro only lens. So you are buying a lens only for macro. You're not going to be able to use it for anything else. Whereas if you were buying a lens that maybe went to 1 or 2 times magnification only, that's a lens that could go in your bag and be used for other purposes. Once again, this is going to be true for any 2 to 5 times magnification macro lens. But just be aware, if you're filling out your kit and you're not sure what's next, this is a very specific lens. It's going to do a very specific thing for you. So you really want to know that's what you want to use it for. The other thing is, to get the best possible results with this lens, it does require some degree of patience. And it can be a little bit of a frustrating learning curve at the start, but once you get it right, the results are incredible, super rewarding. And particularly when you want to show your friends or family a photo that you've taken with this lens that you've absolutely nailed it, they're absolutely going to be wowed. So if that's something you feel like, I got this camera, not really getting photos that anybody thinks are spectacular, you use this thing at 2 to 5 times magnification, they are really going to stand out. Your friends and family have never seen anything like it. The other thing to be aware of, and once again, true with any lens like this, it will put a focus on any dust particles you have on the sensor or that are sitting in the back of the lens. So you have to be very clean, very good with your sensor and lens hygiene. I'll throw some images up on screen now so you can see what I'm talking about. Even if you do your best, you will get these specks in your shots and you will need to go in and edit them and remove them to really clean up those images. In almost every situation, you're going to get some sort of specks. And even in the sample photos that I've got from Astra Hori with their photographers, you can see some of the specks in the shot. The other thing is, with ultra macro photography like this, you will get your best results if you go in and edit the images in something like Lightroom or Capture One or Luminar or something like that. So expect to be taking raw photos and editing those photos to get the best possible results. So this is a 2 to 5 times magnification macro lens at a very fair price point that is going to get you incredible image quality. But if 2 to 5 times magnification isn't where you're at yet, I've just thrown a video on screen now. This is a 1 times magnification macro lens. It's under $200, and it can also be used for general purpose walk-around photography. So if you're not ready to go ultra macro, this is probably a bit more of a general purpose versatile lens for you.